Hi everyone, my name is Paul Veltum, and today I'm going to be talking about replacing the lower ball joints on a Subaru Impreza. The year span should be 2001 through 2007. The car we're going to be working on today is a 2004 RS sedan, but again the design is essentially the same and it is unique to this car, so it's important that I go through this with you and show you there's two key aspects of this repair you want to be particularly careful of so that this repair doesn't become a nightmare for you. So here is the car that we'll be working on today, and one of the things I like to do is start with the car still on the ground, because I'm going to remove the axle nut to remove the CV shaft. That's much easier to do when the car's on the ground because of the amount of torque that it takes to release that. So the first thing I'm going to do is use a punch and a hammer, and I'm going to knock the peen that was done to the axle nut to hold it in place. So I knock that up out of the way, and then I'm going to use an 1 1/4 inch socket to break that loose. And as you can see, it was very easy, and it's just sort of not reality at all, of course, because I've already loosened these bolts and so forth. But I just wanted to show you what it would look like, role play, if you will. Next, you can go ahead and loosen your lug nuts, pull those off, jack the car up in the air, and remove the wheel. So the next step is to work on the lower ball joint nut. First, I'm just going to demonstrate. You should be able to push the axle. It should be floating free in there now. And if it's not, then later on when it comes time to remove it, you're probably going to have to use a hammer. Just be really careful that you don't mushroom the end of the axle shaft, because then it would be difficult to get the nut back onto the axle. So anyway, moving on, lower ball joint. We're going to remove the cotter key pin, and then we're also going to loosen the ball joint. You could take the nut all the way off if you like to. I just didn't do that here. I'm also using what's called a pickle fork to release the ball joint from the control arm. You can use the pickle fork, or you can use a more modern tool that doesn't damage the joint boot at all, but since the joint's already damaged, it doesn't matter. So, all right, so I took the nut off, and now I'm just going to pry the hub assembly away from the control arm. And I'm doing this because I need to remove the CV axle assembly. And the reason I'm doing that is so I don't take any chance on damaging the CV boot while I'm removing the ball joint. And it'll make a little more sense once we get to that point. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide that out of the hub. And again, you may have to do some slamming to get this to happen on your car. If you do, you just want to be really careful. Maybe put a piece of wood in between the two or something. You just don't want to damage the axle shaft in the process. But let's go ahead and finish taking the axle out of the car. In order to do that, on the passenger side here, you're going to come down from up above with a large pry bar to pull it loose from the transaxle. Now remember, you're going to be prying against an aluminum case, so you're going to want to be careful here. So what I'm doing is I'm wedging between the case and the ledge of the half shaft to get that to pop loose. There's just a snap ring that holds it in. There it goes. If you're removing the axle from the driver's side, you're going to have to do this from underneath the car. But on the passenger side, it's done from up above. And now you can go ahead and just reach up in there and remove that shaft. All right, so now we're going to put the ball joint back into the lower control arm. You see that I'm trying to get the angle right, because if you just point the ball joint straight down, you'll never get the thing in there right. You need to orient it in the direction of the way the hole is on the lower control arm when it's pried down, so it needs to be pointed as far back as it can go. So once I get that in there, then I'm just going to put the castle nut back on, and I'm not going to tighten that nut. I'm just going to put it on finger tight just to get it on there, because what we're going to do is use the lower control arm to pry the ball joint from the steering knuckle. The steering knuckle captures the ball joint with a pinch bolt. So here comes the first most important key issue of this repair, and that's getting the pinch bolt out without damaging it or breaking it, which would be really a disaster. So this is a brand new pinch bolt, but normally there is some resistance there. They're not terribly strong, so if you sense a lot of resistance, you're going to want to heat up the steering knuckle at the back where the threads are, causing it to expand and soften so that you can get that bolt out of there. To heat that up, you're going to probably end up using, they have a MAP gas, oxygen gas kit that you can purchase from Lowe's, and that will enable you to get that knuckle red hot back there around the boss where it's threaded. The directions of how to use a tool like that and so forth is beyond the scope of this video, but you can, if you don't know how to use that, you can go online and I'm sure there's people out there that will show you how to do that. Just be really careful. Know that the lower ball joint, typically the boot and the grease catch fire, so you're going to have a spray bottle with some water in it so you can douse it once in a while to keep that fire out. Okay, so here I just separated the jaws with, you saw a chisel and a large hammer to spread that apart. That'll make removal of the ball joint much easier. And I'm going to guide this block of wood in front of the ABS wire, and then I'm going to be slamming on this block of wood with a large hammer from up above, and that will drive the ball joint out. Again, fantasy, not reality. That is the second key process of this repair, and that's trying to get that ball joint out of there. So if you follow the steps that I showed you, you're going to find that it's going to work out just fine if you can go through each step successfully. All right. So we're going to put the axle shaft back in, and I have prepped the hole where the ball joint's going to go, and I've got some anti-seize in there. Got it all cleaned up with some sandpaper, so it's ready to go. And when you're inserting your axle shaft, you're going to see it'll drop in here in a moment, but try to get the axle as straight as possible when you're slamming it home. There you go. You can see it's in position. So at this point, you're going to put the front of the axle into the hub. So that's in place. And then you're going to insert the ball joint into the steering knuckle. Now, I was replacing the control arms here, and they came preloaded with the ball joint. So the ball joint is actually already mounted to the control arm. And what I'm doing here is I'm tilting the ball joint backwards so it will slide into the steering knuckle properly. And I've already got some anti-seize on it, so it's going to be a nice fit, and it's not going to bind up on me again. But typically, if you're just replacing your ball joint, what's going to happen is you'll buy the ball joint on its own, and you can just slide that up in there, and then you can mount your lower control arm to the ball joint in that way. All right, so I got it driven home. It's in place. Now the ball joint design, the way it's held in there is a groove that goes all the way around the ball joint. And the pinch bolt, when it's lined up properly, the pinch bolt will slide right through there. And that's what holds that ball joint in there, along with the clamping force of the jaw action of the lower portion of the steering knuckle. So I put just a touch of anti-seize on it to keep it from seizing up again. And I'm going to go ahead and roll that in and tighten it up. All right, so now again, this bolt, I have a friend that works at the dealership, and he said there's a lot of people that break these, even technicians. So you just want to be careful with it when you're tightening it down, that you don't go too crazy. You get it good and tight, but don't be a gorilla, because you don't want to break the thing. So once it's tight, you're all done. You're all set. You can go ahead and put the outer nut on the axle shaft, and you can just kind of spin that on there temporarily, put your wheel back on, and then you can just spin on the lug nuts there, drop the car down, and then tighten your outer axle nut to the proper specification, and peen the edge down into the keyway, which will be likely the same spot where it was, and you'll be all done. So that's it. That's how you replace the lower ball joints on a Subaru Impreza spanning years 2001 to 2007. This case was a 2004. I wish you the best of success with it. Be careful and good luck.